Power has a strange sound when it knocks on your door. It's not loud. It's confident, controlled. It arrives early, before the world wakes, and it never waits for permission. That's what I heard that morning. 3 deliberate knocks, 2 official, 2 rehearsed to be random. The kind that made your spine straighten before your mind caught up. I was halfway through my first sip of coffee when the pounding came again, and through the window's glare, I saw 2 uniforms waiting on my porch. Not police uniforms, something else. Almost right, but not quite. The patches were too shiny, the badges too flat. The logo on their sleeves read HOA Police Department. My gut tightened instantly. I'd seen impersonators before, but never ones bold enough to brand themselves with a homeowners association. When I opened the door, the taller one, a man with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, straightened as if reporting to a superior. "Good morning, sir. We're here on official business regarding property code violations," he said, voice steady, manufactured authority dripping from every syllable. The woman beside him shifted, her expression blank but rehearsed. "We've had reports of unapproved modifications to your garage and potential zoning infractions. We'll need to take a look inside." I stared at them, silent for a beat too long. They carried no clipboards, no scanners, no paperwork. Just vests, radios, and the audacity to believe their costume made them untouchable. Then, behind them, like a director waiting for her cue, stood Karen. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our cul-de-sac. President of the HOA, ruler of lawn ordinances, and self-declared guardian of community standards. She was the kind of neighbor who believed rules were sacred until they didn't suit her. And she smiled at me like she'd finally cornered her favorite villain. "Morning," she chirped. "Just routine inspection, agent." She loved using my title, twisting it into something sarcastic. Agent, not as respect, but as a reminder that even a federal badge couldn't shield me from her neighborhood empire. "Routine inspection?" I said. Funny because I don't recall our HOA hiring an enforcement division. Karen tilted her head, all sugar and poison. "Well, times are changing. Safety concerns? Property values. We've established a new HOA police initiative, community-funded, fully trained volunteers. You of all people should appreciate order." Her 2 officers shifted their stance like actors waiting for applause. "Volunteers," I repeated. "You mean you just made up your own police force?" The taller one stepped forward. "Sir, please cooperate. We'd rather not escalate this." I looked from his plastic badge to my real one clipped at my belt. "You can't escalate what you don't have jurisdiction over." That broke his rhythm. His voice faltered. You can't obstruct." I cut him off. "Obstruct what? A neighborhood watch on steroids?" Karen's smile tightened, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "You've been difficult since the day you moved in," she hissed. "Always questioning, always ignoring community rules." I folded my arms. "You mean your rules?" "The ones you invent." She stepped closer, perfume sharp in the morning air. "You think you're untouchable because of that badge. But this isn't your jurisdiction. This is my neighborhood. There it was. The truth under all her civility. The HOA had stopped being a committee months ago. It had become her kingdom. And these 2 fake cops? Her private knights. I didn't move. "Unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, you're trespassing." Karen gave a thin smile. "You'll regret this. The officers took photos of my driveway, my house, my plates. They scribbled notes on blank paper just to look busy." The taller one muttered something about non-compliance. Then they left. Slowly, deliberately, making sure every neighbor watching saw the scene. By the time their SUV pulled away, my phone buzzed with a message from my boss. "We need to talk, now." I didn't even make it to the office before realizing how far this thing had already spread. The internal review had begun. Someone, probably Karen, had filed a complaint alleging aggressive behavior toward community safety officers. By noon, my badge felt heavier. My job, something I'd spent a decade building, suddenly looked fragile, hanging by the thread of a neighborhood rumor. Inside the office, my boss paced like a man caught between protocol and disbelief. "We've received multiple statements," he said flatly. alleging you threatened civilians during an HOA inspection. Civilians? I asked. Those were actors. A fake HOA police team. I have photos, he exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I believe you. But this came from someone higher, through official channels. It's Messy, Karen's uncle, deputy director of local oversight. The connection hit me like a punch. She wasn't just power-hungry. She was plugged in. She'd been untouchable long before the uniforms. She's using that connection to run a scam, I said. Fake citations, extortion. She's making neighbors pay fines for imaginary violations. He met my eyes. Then prove it quietly. That was the problem. Quiet investigations don't survive loud lies. When I drove home that evening, the fake cruiser was parked at the corner again. Two silhouettes sat inside, unmoving, watching. My reflection stared back at me in the side mirror, a federal agent being stalked by his own neighbors. I sat there for a moment, hand hovering over the door handle. Then I grabbed my phone and started recording. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. Evening, I said, walking up to the SUV. The window rolled down an inch, just enough for a voice to escape. We're monitoring for compliance issues, sir. I leaned closer. Here's a compliance issue for you. Impersonating law enforcement is a federal crime. The driver's jaw twitched. We're within our rights. No, I said. You're within Karen's. The passenger reached for the gear shift. You're making a mistake, Agent. I smiled faintly. I don't make the same mistake twice. They drove off, tires whispering against the asphalt. The silence they left behind was worse than the noise. It meant they'd be back. Inside my house, I flipped open my laptop and began documenting everything. License plates, faces, timestamps, every flyer Karen had distributed. Patterns started to emerge. Same printer font, same paper weight, same phrasing. Failure to comply will result in citation and potential legal action. She'd built a bureaucracy of fear from her dining room table. By midnight, I had enough to draft a report. By morning, I had enough to make enemies. That day, I met Detective Alvarez, a local cop with a reputation for honesty, which made him rare. When I laid out the evidence, he leaned back in his chair, whistling softly. So let me get this straight, he said. Your neighbor's running her own police force, issuing fake fines and threatening to evict people who don't pay? Exactly, I said. He nodded slowly. Sounds like racketeering with a homeowners association twist. I gave him the list of names, people who'd been cited, harassed, humiliated. He promised to look into it, but his tone carried the weight of bureaucracy. If this woman's got family in government, he said, we'll need airtight proof. I knew that tone too well. It meant you're on your own for now. Over the next few days, I became both agent and witness. Neighbors whispered about new citations. Cars with tinted windows lingered at intersections. Letters appeared in mailboxes demanding fines for absurd infractions. Non-regulation porch lighting, unauthorized mailbox color, improper holiday decoration timing. Karen had turned compliance into currency and fear into a business model. When Tamara, my next-door neighbor, came to me in tears, clutching a notice threatening foreclosure over grass height violation, I knew I couldn't wait for procedure. I set up cameras, logged timestamps, collected documents. Every move Karen made, I recorded. Every complaint she filed, I traced. She was using the HOA's name to launder threats into legitimacy. But power built on lies eventually trips over truth. Late one night, as I reviewed footage, I caught the moment her fake officers loaded a box of blank citation slips into their SUV. I zoomed in on the side of the box, Private Sec Group California branch, not law enforcement, not licensed security. Just a shell company, one I'd later discover was registered under Karen's maiden name. I smiled for the first time in weeks. I finally had proof, but proof I knew only mattered if you lived long enough to use it. The next morning, Karen stood at the end of my driveway, arms folded, lips curled in satisfaction. You think you've won something? She said. No, I replied. Just collecting evidence. Her expression froze. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Be careful, she said softly, like a threat wrapped in advice. Some people don't like it when you dig too deep. I met her gaze. Neither do I. That was the moment the game changed, because that's the thing about power. It only works if everyone believes in it. And I just stopped believing in hers. The morning light slanted through the blinds, slicing the room into bars of gold and shadow. My coffee sat untouched, the surface trembling slightly from the faint hum of the refrigerator. Sleep had been a lost cause. I'd spent the night combing through the files Alvarez sent. License records, security contracts, and complaint histories tied to Karen's so-called HOA enforcement unit. The deeper I dug, the uglier it got. False citations, intimidation tactics, cash transactions with no receipts. Karen's little empire was built on fear, and the worst part was, people had bought into it. The HOA wasn't a community anymore. It was a quiet dictatorship, and Karen was its self-appointed queen. By noon, the air outside was heavy with that familiar pre-storm humidity. Cars lined both sides of Maple Hollow Drive, their chrome mirrors flashing sunlight like little alarms. The HOA meeting was set for 1 o'clock sharp at the community center, and for once, everyone was showing up. Word had spread about Karen's new HOA police, and curiosity had turned into anxiety. I drove in silence, every turn of the wheel echoing the same question. How far had she gone? When I arrived, the parking lot was already packed. Neighbors who usually waved or smiled now lingered near the doors in tense clusters, whispering. Tamara stood near the entrance, arms crossed, wearing that look that said she'd seen too much but wasn't about to back down. "Big day," she said quietly as I approached. "Yeah," I murmured. "Let's hope it ends better than the last one." Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Folding chairs filled the hall, and a cheap plastic banner reading HOA Safety and Order Initiative hung crookedly behind a long folding table. Karen stood at the front, her trademark white blazer gleaming under the lights like a warning signal. Beside her, 5 men in black tactical uniforms stood guard, hands on their belts, radios clipped to their shoulders. No badges, no official insignia, just presence. The kind that said, "Don't ask questions." Karen smiled as I entered, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Glad you could make it," she said smoothly, voice amplified through a handheld mic. "We're here today to address some concerns about community safety." I took a seat near the back, watching as she launched into her speech. "Lately, we've had a few incidents," she continued, pacing in front of the table like a seasoned politician. "Noise complaints, vandalism, and general disrespect for HOA policies. That's why I took the initiative to establish our new HOA police, to ensure a safe and orderly neighborhood." A few people clapped, though half-heartedly. The rest just looked at one another, uncertain. Tamara leaned closer. "HOA police? She's actually doubling down." I didn't answer. My jaw tightened as Karen gestured toward the fake officers. "These men are volunteers," she said proudly. "They've already issued several citations for noise violations, unkempt lawns, and suspicious activities. It's all about keeping our streets safe and preserving property values." That was it. The last straw, I stood up. The chair legs screeched against the tile and the entire room went silent. "That's a lie," I said, my voice carrying through the hall. Heads turned. Karen froze mid-step, the mic hovering near her mouth. "Excuse me?" she said, her tone sharp but wavering. I took a step forward. "Your so-called HOA police aren't legitimate. They're part of a private security company with no legal authority to issue fines or citations." "You're running a scam, Karen!" Gasps rippled through the crowd. One of the fake officers started moving toward me, but I didn't flinch. I reached inside my jacket and flashed my badge. "Federal agent. Touch me and you'll regret it." The man hesitated, eyes darting toward Karen for guidance. "These goons," I continued, "are hired muscle. Nothing more. Karen's been extorting her own neighbors, making them pay bogus fines and threatening eviction. It's illegal, every bit of it." Karen's mask cracked. Her smile twisted into a sneer. "You're just bitter because you can't handle following rules like everyone else." I pulled out my phone, opened the folder of evidence Alvarez had sent, and held it high. "Here's proof. Your HOA police aren't licensed. The company they volunteer for isn't contracted with this community. You've been faking citations and pocketing the money yourself." A low murmur swept through the hall. Someone stood up, an older man from Oak Ridge Lane. "Karen, is that true?" he asked, voice trembling. "Are they even real security?" Karen faltered. Her mic squealed with feedback. "They're volunteers," she stammered. They care about our safety." "Volunteers," I said, stepping closer, "don't get to detain people. They don't issue fines, and they sure as hell don't threaten families." I pointed toward the stack of papers beside her. "Let's see those citations." "I bet they're just as fake as your authority." Karen's hands shook as she reached for the stack, trying to pull it away. Too late. One of the neighbors grabbed a sheet and held it up. "This doesn't look right," he said. "There's no seal, no signature, just your name printed at the bottom." The tension snapped like a wire. People surged forward, demanding answers. Phones came out, flashes lit the room. Karen shouted over the noise, "That's confidential information! Put that down!" But the crowd wasn't listening anymore. One of the fake officers stepped back, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this," before bolting out the door. That was the moment Alvarez arrived. The door swung open, and he strode in, uniform crisp, eyes hard. The chatter died instantly. "Everyone stay calm," he said, flashing his badge. "We're conducting an investigation into unauthorized security operations and potential extortion within this HOA. Karen's face drained of color. "You can't just walk in here," she snapped. "This is private property." "Actually," Alvarez said, his tone cutting, "it's a community center owned by the residents." And several of them filed complaints. He turned to her. "Karen Miller, you're under investigation for fraud, intimidation, and misuse of HOA funds. Please step forward." Karen tried to steady herself. "This is harassment." "I have connections." But nobody backed her up this time. Even her closest supporters avoided her gaze. When Alvarez cuffed her, the sound of the metal clicking shut echoed through the room. The once mighty HOA queen looked small, her power evaporating under fluorescent light. I caught Alvarez's eye as he led her toward the door. He gave a faint nod. "Good work," he said quietly. As Karen disappeared into the sunlight outside, the neighbors erupted, not in applause, but in relief. Conversations overlapped. People apologized to one another, realizing how deeply they'd been manipulated. Tamara came up to me, eyes bright with tears. "You did it," she whispered. I exhaled, the tension finally breaking. "We did it," I corrected. Outside, the fake police vehicles sat abandoned, their cheap decals peeling in the sun. One by one, neighbors tore the violation notices off their mailboxes and crumpled them up. For the first time in months, the air in Maple Hollow felt clean, real, free. The sun had barely risen when the first whisper drifted across the quiet street. For the first time in months, there were no fake sirens, no self-appointed patrols in knockoff uniforms, just the soft hum of sprinklers and the rustle of wind through freshly mowed lawns. But peace, I knew, could be deceiving. In the shadow of what had just unfolded, Karen's empire might have fallen, but the wreckage she left behind still clung to every corner of the neighborhood. After Karen's arrest, the FBI cleared my record. Yet I couldn't shake the unease that she'd planned something deeper, something that hadn't surfaced yet. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching as a pair of official HOA inspectors, real ones this time, took photos of the old fake patrol car that had been towed from the end of the block. Its once imposing HOA police decals were now half-peeled and sun-faded, a perfect symbol of Karen's crumbling illusion of power. Inside, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors. "Sorry for not speaking up sooner," one read. Another said, "Thank you. We finally feel safe again." For the first time in a long while, I smiled. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the gnawing thought that Karen had built too big an operation to vanish overnight. Later that afternoon, I received a call from Alvarez. His tone was grave. "We wrapped the local case," he said. "But there's something you should see. Karen's been cooperating." "Kind of." My grip tightened on the phone. "Kind of?" "She's naming names. Turns out your little fake HOA wasn't just a neighborhood scam. It's part of a bigger private enforcement network, rogue security firms selling authority to anyone with enough cash. And someone high up's been funding her. The line went silent for a second as the realization sank in. Karen hadn't been acting alone. She'd been a pawn in something far more organized. "Send me everything you have," I said quietly. That night, I sat at my desk poring over the documents Alvarez had emailed. Financial trails, dummy companies, unregistered LLCs, all leading back to a single consulting firm that claimed to specialize in residential compliance solutions. The same firm had contracts with dozens of neighborhoods across the state. Karen was small-time compared to this. The real operation was still out there, and I had the scars to prove how dangerous they could be. By morning, I drove to the bureau. My boss met me at the door, expression unreadable. "I heard about the network," he said. "You're not officially assigned to this, but I also know you won't let it go. He wasn't wrong. After months of being harassed, accused, and nearly ruined, I couldn't stand by while someone else turned ordinary communities into their own private police states. Just don't make it personal," he added. But it was personal. That week, Alvarez and I dug deeper. The more we uncovered, the uglier it got. The fake security company Karen had hired wasn't a one-off. They'd operated under at least 6 different names. Their so-called officers carried forged permits, falsified background checks, and had even been involved in incidents of intimidation and extortion across several suburbs. Worse, one of the funding sources led to a politician's campaign fund, a man running on law and order promises who quietly backed private enforcement deals. As we connected the dots, I realized Karen had been used. Her arrogance made her the perfect test case, a suburban dictator with just enough influence to make people obey and just enough recklessness to take the fall when it went bad. But now the people behind her were running scared, cleaning up evidence, silencing anyone who might expose them. One evening, Alvarez called again. "You should see this." He sent me a video, grainy security footage from the local jail. Karen, in an orange jumpsuit, sitting at a table across from a suited man whose face wasn't visible. The audio was muted, but the body language told me everything. She wasn't scared. She was confident. "She's cutting a deal," I muttered. Alvarez sighed. "Probably. And if she flips on them, great. But if she walks out free and angry..." I didn't need him to finish. The next morning, my suspicions became reality. Karen was out on bail. The neighborhood group chat exploded with shocked messages. No one knew where she was, but everyone felt her presence like a storm cloud rolling back in. I drove home that evening, checking my mirrors out of habit. The paranoia had become second nature. When I pulled into my driveway, something glinted on my porch, a small unmarked envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. Me, standing in front of the bureau, taken just that morning. Scrawled beneath it in red ink were 4 words. "You didn't win yet." My blood ran cold. This wasn't over. The following days blurred into each other. Rumors swirled that Karen was cooperating with investigators, but I didn't buy it. People like her didn't fold. They adapted. The fake HOA had been her stage, and she'd simply lost one act. She'd find another. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. A hidden number. I answered, expecting a threat. Instead, a familiar voice whispered, "They're coming after Alvarez next." Before I could respond, the line went dead. 2 hours later, Alvarez's unmarked car was found vandalized outside his apartment. No injuries, no suspects, just a warning. That was the moment I decided this wouldn't stay off the books any longer. With my boss's reluctant approval, I assembled a small joint task force, real agents, not paper pushers. Our target, the shell companies behind the fake enforcement groups. As the pieces came together, we discovered Karen's arrest had triggered a cascade. A dozen suburban neighborhoods had started reporting similar impersonators, similar tactics, similar fake compliance fines. It wasn't just a scam, it was an organized manipulation ring designed to control communities through fear, and at its center, every paper trail curved back toward the same entity. Centurion Community Solutions. Weeks later, we raided their main office, a sleek corporate building on the outskirts of town that looked more like a tech startup than a criminal front. Inside, we found boxes of fabricated badges, blank citations, even photo IDs bearing the name HOA Enforcement Division. One file caught my eye. Karen Daniels, Pilot Program Asset. I flipped through it, each page more disturbing than the last. They'd monitored her progress, fed her fake authority, even encouraged escalation to test resident compliance thresholds. We were all part of their experiment. When I brought the evidence to my boss, he stared at it for a long moment. "This goes higher than I thought," he said. "We'll need to escalate," but escalation came at a price. Suddenly, leaks appeared, internal emails warning me to stay in my lane. Someone wanted this buried. I refused. The case gained traction faster than I expected. Media outlets picked up the story, branding it the fake HOA scandal. Neighbors who'd once avoided me were now lining up to give statements. Tamara even testified, her voice trembling but clear as she described the fear Karen's patrol had spread. Each testimony tore down another layer of the facade. The FBI, once hesitant, now pushed full force. When the indictments dropped, Karen's smug face appeared on every news broadcast, but she wasn't the only one. Executives from Centurion were named, along with 2 city officials accused of accepting bribes. Justice had finally caught up. Still, I couldn't bring myself to celebrate. Not yet. That night I drove through the neighborhood, the same streets that had once echoed with threats and paranoia. Now they were calm, almost too calm. Porch lights glowed softly, children's bikes rested on driveways, and for the first time in months I didn't feel eyes watching me. As I parked, Tamara waved from across the street. "Looks like it's over," she said, smiling. "Maybe," I replied. But peace has to be guarded just like freedom, because if Karen had taught me anything, it was that power doesn't always come with a badge. It comes with fear. And once someone learns how to use that fear, they don't give it up easily. I looked toward the old HOA office, now empty, its windows dark. Somewhere inside, Karen's shadow still lingered, a reminder that even in the quietest suburbs, control can take on the shape of a neighbor with a smile and a clipboard. As I turned to head inside, a single notification buzzed on my phone, an email from an unknown sender. Subject line, "New development, Centurion 2.0. Attached was a single image, an official-looking flyer from a different town. Same uniforms, same logo, same slogan. Only one thing was different this time. The contact name at the bottom read, Karen D., Regional Advisor. I stared at it for a long moment, the chill returning to my bones. She was out there again, and the war wasn't over.